Hello, Heartland fan. Welcome on my YouTube channel. It's been a long wait, but the moment Heartland fans have been desperately hoping for is finally here. Borden is back, but his return isn't what anyone expected. His arrival doesn't just bring relief, it brings chaos, questions, and a sense that nothing will ever be the same again. The episode begins with a familiar, yet almost haunting feeling. The rolling hills of Heartland, once calm and serene, now feel like a backdrop for something bigger, a storm that's brewing on the horizon. The ranch has been going through the motions. Amy, after all these years, has finally found some semblance of peace. She is no longer the young girl who is going through grief and loss. She's become a woman, a mother, and the backbone of the family. Yet, in the quiet corners of the ranch, there's an undercurrent of uncertainty. Ty's absence is still felt. His legacy, what he meant to the family, to Amy, to the ranch, is never far from anyone's thoughts. His memory lingers like the scent of wildflowers in the air, comforting yet painful. And just when Amy thought she had healed, just when she thought she could move forward, the past comes crashing back. It begins with a phone call, the kind that seems so ordinary at first, the kind that could be from anyone. But it's not. It's a name Amy hasn't heard in years, and the words that follow shake her to her core. Ty is coming home. The first few moments of the episode are filled with disbelief. Amy is in shock, her emotions mixed excitement, fear, and confusion. The scene shifts to the family ranch. Jack, who's always been the steady hand of the family, can't hide his surprise either. For years, he's tried to keep the family together, to keep the legacy of Heartland intact. But Ty's return brings everything into question. Is it the right time? Will he be the same person he once was? Will he be able to walk back into a life that's moved on without him? The ranch itself seems to be holding its breath, as if the land itself is waiting for Ty's return, unsure of what it will bring. The tension is palpable. The horses move uneasily, the wind picks up, and the familiar landscape seems to shift, as if the ground beneath everyone's feet is changing. Amy finds herself standing alone, staring at the horizon. She has no answers, no way of knowing what's coming next. All she knows is that Ty's return will change everything. And yet, part of her can't help but hope that he will be the person she remembers, the person who once made her feel whole. But time changes people. The Ty who left may not be the same Ty who comes back. The uncertainty of that hangs in the air, thick with anticipation. As the camera zooms in on Amy's face, we see her struggle with conflicting emotions. She's torn between her love for Ty and the fear of what his return could mean for her and the family. The audience is left wondering, will Ty's return bring them closer together, or will it tear them apart? In the next moments, the episode begins to weave in flashbacks. The audience is reminded of the bond between Ty and Amy, of the struggles they faced, the love they shared, and the tragedy that led to his absence. These flashbacks are bittersweet, each one a reminder of the life they once had, but also of the life Amy has built without him. Ty's return is not just a simple reunion. It's a reckoning, a question of whether the past can truly be left behind or whether it will resurface, demanding to be dealt with. The audience is left on the edge of their seats, wondering if Ty and Amy's love can withstand the pressure of time, loss, and everything that's changed. The stage is set. What happens next will shape the future of Heartland, and Ty's return is only the beginning of the journey. The tension, the unanswered questions, and the drama of the family's complicated history will unfold in the most unexpected ways. As the sun begins to dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows across Heartland, the quiet tension continues to simmer. Amy stands by the barn, her heart racing with anticipation, every nerve on edge. The reality of Ty's return is slowly sinking in, but the question still lingers: what kind of man will return to Heartland? The boy she loved? The man who left? Or someone entirely different, shaped by time and distance? The night before, Amy couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind, seemed to echo with memories. She found herself replaying the moments that led to Ty's departure, the heartbreak, the promises made, and ultimately, the silence that followed. It had been a difficult road when she had to walk without him, but in the end, she had managed. She had rebuilt her life, found purpose, and found a deep, unwavering love for the land and for her daughter. And yet, in the quietest moments, she had always wondered what could have been if Ty had stayed. But now, standing here, she's torn between that quiet hope and the stark reality of what his return could bring. Will she still see him as the person she fell in love with, or will he seem like a stranger? The door of the barn creaks open, and the familiar figure of Ty steps into the soft glow of the lantern light. The moment he walks into view, everything seems to freeze. Time itself appears to pause, as though the world is waiting for their reunion. For a split second, Amy doesn't know how to react. She's not sure whether to run into his arms or stay frozen, afraid of what might happen next. Ty looks different. He's older, more weathered by time, but the same warmth in his eyes is still there. However, there's an unspoken distance between them, something more profound than the miles that once separated them. He looks at Amy, his face softening with a mix of relief and hesitation, as though he too is unsure of how to bridge the gap that's formed between them. "Amy," his voice cracks, but he doesn't finish his sentence. There's no need for words because, in that moment, everything they've both been holding back comes rushing to the surface. The history of their love, their pain, the life they once shared, all of it collides in that one moment. Amy steps forward, her breath catching in her throat. There's a surge of emotion, anger, love, sadness, all mixed into one. She wants to yell at him, to ask why he left, to demand answers to all the questions that have been building up for years. But she doesn't. Instead, she reaches out her hand, trembling, uncertain of what to do. Their fingers brush for a brief second, and it's as though a shockwave runs through both of them. For a moment, everything else fades away: the ranch, the past, the questions. They all disappear as they stand there, locked in this moment. It's both beautiful and painful. But the beauty doesn't last long. Ty pulls back slightly, his face hardening, as though he's been carrying a weight for too long. "I know I left. I didn't want to, but I had to. I had to figure things out." His words seem rehearsed, too carefully chosen. It's clear that he's been thinking about what to say for a long time, but it doesn't quite hit the mark. Amy can't help but feel a sense of betrayal. She spent years wondering if he would come back, but in the back of her mind, she never truly believed it would happen. And now that it has, she doesn't know what to make of it. "You don't get to just walk back in, Ty. You left us." Her voice is soft but firm. There's no venom in her words, but they cut deep. She's not just angry at him for leaving. She's angry at herself for ever letting herself believe he might come back. Ty looks pained, his eyes shadowed with regret. I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but please, just let me explain," he pleads. But before Amy can respond, the sound of hooves approaching from the distance breaks the tension. The horses, once calm, seem to stir in the barn. Amy, taken aback, turns her head toward the stable. But when she looks back at Ty, he's already walking away. The weight of his words hangs in the air, but so does the uncertainty of what comes next. Amy knows she can't just sweep everything under the rug. Ty's return forces her to confront everything she's avoided for so long: the unspoken hurt, the unfinished conversations, and the trust that's been broken. She wants to believe that he can come back, that they can pick up where they left off. But deep down, she knows it's not that simple. The episode continues to build. The complexity of their relationship and the family dynamics begin to shift in ways that no one anticipated. Jack watches from a distance, his old eyes filled with concern. He's been through enough heartbreak to know that sometimes people change, sometimes the past is too heavy to bear. But he also knows that the bond of family is strong enough to withstand even the toughest storms. As Amy and Ty both navigate the emotional minefield of their reunion, the ranch becomes a battleground for their unresolved pain and love. The land itself, which has always been a symbol of healing, becomes the backdrop for a new kind of struggle, one where the heart can no longer avoid the truths it has been running from. The suspense continues to build, and just as Amy is about to confront Ty with the questions that have been eating away at her, the camera cuts away, leaving the audience wondering what's really at stake. Will Ty's return be the catalyst for healing, or will it ignite a new set of conflicts that threaten to tear the family apart once more? Every second of this reunion is charged with emotion, and as the episode unfolds, the audience is left wondering what kind of future these two characters once so in sync, can build together after all these years apart. The only thing certain now is that nothing will ever be the same. The following morning, the ranch is bathed in the soft light of dawn, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions that has brewed the night before. Amy stirs, still tangled in the aftermath of Ty's unexpected return. The weight of their conversation lingers in her mind, and she finds herself torn between the hope of rekindling what they once had and the fear of reopening old wounds. The ranch, usually a place of solace, now feels like a stage for the unresolved drama of their past. Ty's return set her mind racing. The questions she had carefully locked away for years came flooding back, and now she found herself facing the unthinkable. She had to confront not only her past with Ty, but also the reality of who he had become. The world she had built without him felt fragile, as if it could shatter in an instant. The house was quiet, the silence stretching uncomfortably between them. The familiar scent of coffee filled the air, but there was no warmth in it, not yet. Amy moved through the motions, preparing breakfast for herself, her daughter, and Jack. But there was a heaviness to everything. She could feel it in her every movement, like the weight of an unspoken truth hanging in the room. Ty, too, was awake, but he hadn't come downstairs. Amy knew he was likely out there somewhere, perhaps lost in his own thoughts, trying to find his place in a home that hadn't been his for years. She couldn't help but wonder what he was thinking, what he was feeling after everything. But when she finally saw him standing at the door, looking out toward the horizon, there was a palpable tension in the air. It was as though he was waiting for the world to catch up with him, for the ground to solidify beneath his feet. The more she looked at him, the more she realized that I wasn't just struggling with the weight of returning home, he was struggling with who he was now. The reunion wasn't just about reconnecting, it was about redefining themselves in a world that had moved forward without them. Ty was no longer the same person who had left, and neither was Amy. She had grown stronger, more independent, but that didn't mean she was ready to let go of the past entirely. "Do you want some coffee?" Amy asked, her voice carefully neutral as she moved to the counter. Ty didn't respond immediately, his gaze lost in the vast expanse of the ranch. "I don't know if I deserve a cup," he said quietly, the words carrying an unexpected weight. It was clear that he didn't feel like he belonged here, like he wasn't sure whether he should even be in the same space as her. Amy couldn't help but bristle at the implication. "You don't get to come back after all this time and act like you don't belong. You made a choice, Tay. You walked away, and now you have to face the consequences of that." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the truth she had been avoiding for so long. Tay didn't flinch, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, regret, perhaps, or shame. He knew that this wasn't an easy road to walk, and he couldn't pretend that it would be. "I never wanted to leave, Amy. You have to understand that," he said, his voice raw with emotion. Amy turned to face him, her eyes narrowed. "Then why did you?" The question felt like a knife to the gut, but it was one she needed the answer to. She had spent too many sleepless nights wondering the same thing, asking herself if she could have done something differently, if she could have made him stay. Ty's silence was deafening, but eventually, he spoke. "It wasn't because of you. It was because of me. I had to figure out who I was. I couldn't be the man you needed me to be when I didn't even know who I was anymore." There was a raw honesty in his voice, but Amy wasn't ready to let go of the hurt. "And now you think you can just pick up where we left off? You think everything is just going to be the way it was?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay strong. Tay's eyes softened, a hint of vulnerability breaking through his walls. "I don't know, Amy, but I want to try." The words seemed sincere, but there was something in his tone that Amy couldn't ignore. He was asking for forgiveness, but it felt like a different kind of request, a plea to be absolved of the choices he had made, as if they could erase the years of silence and hurt. The reality of their situation started to sink in. Tay was here, but he was still a stranger in so many ways. Before Amy could respond, Jack entered the room, his presence a grounding force amidst the tension. He looked between them, assessing the situation with his usual quiet wisdom. He had always been the one to hold things together when everything seemed to be falling apart, but even he knew that this was a storm unlike any they had faced before. "How about we let things settle for a bit?" Jack said, his voice steady and calm. You two have a lot to talk about, but right now we've got work to do." There was an unspoken understanding in his words. Jack knew that the only way through this mess was to take things one step at a time. They couldn't rush the healing process, but they also couldn't ignore it. Reluctantly, Amy nodded. She wasn't ready to forgive, not yet, but she knew that she couldn't push Tay away completely, not without understanding what had changed, and not without knowing if he was truly the man she had once loved. As the day unfolded, the tension didn't dissipate. Every word spoken, every glance exchanged, felt like it was weighed down by the past. Amy and Ty went through the motions of the day, working with the horses, repairing fences, doing the things they used to do together, but there was an undeniable distance between them. They were no longer the same people they had been when they first fell in love. Amy could see it in the way Tay moved, the way he hesitated before speaking. He wasn't the boy who had stood beside her, ready to face the world together. This Ty was guarded, uncertain, as though the weight of his absence had left a scar on his soul. But as the day progressed, something shifted. Amy caught a glimpse of the old Ty, the one who would always make her laugh, the one who would fight for what he believed in. In a fleeting moment, she felt a flicker of hope, the possibility that they could find their way back to each other. But that hope was fragile, like an ember in the cold wind. As the sun began to set, the tension in the air thickened once more. The episode left the audience on edge, unsure of what would come next. Could Tay and Amy reconcile their past with the present, or would the ghosts of their history pull them apart? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain. Tay's return was only the beginning of a much larger story, one that would test the limits of love, trust, and forgiveness. The days following Tay's return were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions and quiet moments of reflection. The ranch, once a place of solace and routine, felt more like a battleground, a place where both Amy and Ty were trying to rebuild a life that no longer existed. The space between them seemed wider than the distance of the years they had spent apart, and yet there were still those fleeting moments where everything felt right again. But those moments were fleeting, overshadowed by the looming question, could they move forward together, or were they forever tethered to the past? Ty had thrown himself into the work on the ranch, as if trying to prove he was still the man he used to be, or perhaps to distract himself from the turmoil inside. He spent long hours fixing fences, tending to the horses, and performing tasks that demanded focus. But there was always a shadow of doubt that hung over him. He was trying to find his place again, but the ranch felt different, the air thicker, the land heavier. The Heartland he had known didn't feel like the same place anymore, and he felt like an outsider in his own home. Amy, too, had immersed herself in the work. But for her, it was less about distraction and more about proving to herself that she was capable of handling everything on her own. She had come so far since Ty left, built a life she was proud of, and now she was unsure how to reconcile that with the man who had walked back into her world, asking for a second chance. As they worked side by side on the ranch, the tension between them remained palpable. There were moments of awkward silence where neither knew what to say, and times when their old routines clashed with the new reality. Ty, once a steady presence by her side, seemed uncertain, his hands trembling ever so slightly when he reached for a tool or steadied a horse. Amy noticed it, but didn't comment. She didn't want to acknowledge the fact that the man she had once known wasn't completely here. He was still haunted by the past, and she could see it in his eyes. One afternoon, as they walked down toward the stable, Amy couldn't take it anymore. She stopped in her tracks, turning to face Ty, her breath coming in sharp, deliberate bursts. The silence between them was unbearable. "Why did you leave, Ty? Why did you just walk away?" Her voice was hoarse, filled with a frustration that had built up over the years. She was tired of pretending that things could just go back to how they were. Ty stopped walking, his eyes darkening as if the question itself cut too deep. "I already told you, Amy. I didn't leave because of you. I left because I had to. I was lost. I needed to figure out who I was before I could come back to you." His voice faltered for a moment, but he pressed on. "I didn't know how to be the person you needed me to be. I didn't even know who I was anymore." Amy stared at him, her chest rising and falling with the weight of his words. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that he had changed, but the scars of his absence ran deep. "And now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you know who you are now?" Ty looked at her, his eyes searching hers for something forgiveness, understanding, maybe even a second chance. "I'm still figuring that out," he admitted. "But I know I want to be here. With you. With our family. I need time." Amy nodded slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing just a fraction. She wasn't ready to forgive him, not yet, but she could see the sincerity in his eyes. Maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. But it would take time to heal, time to rebuild, and time to rediscover the love they had once shared. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the ranch, Amy and Ty stood in silence, the weight of their shared history hanging between them. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but for the first time in years, there was a glimmer of hope, a fragile, flickering hope that they might just find their way back to each other. The vulnerability in his tone is almost unbearable. Amy takes a deep breath, her heart pounding. "You were gone for so long, Tay. I had to live without you. I had to raise our daughter alone, to take care of this place alone. I had to learn to be strong on my own. Do you know how hard that was? How painful it was to think about you, to wonder if you were ever coming back, to wonder if I'd done something wrong." The rawness in Amy's voice catches Tay off guard. He's always known how much he hurt her, but hearing it out loud in the open makes it real in a way he hadn't anticipated. His chest tightens, as if the air is thickening around him. "I never wanted to hurt you," Amy Ty whispers, stepping closer. "I know I made a mistake, but I've spent all this time trying to make sense of it, trying to make myself whole again so I could come back to you the way you deserve. But now I'm here, and it's not as easy as I thought it would be." Amy's expression softens just slightly, but the walls she's built up around her heart are still firmly in place. She's still unsure. She still doesn't know if she can trust him again. "I need you to prove it, Tay. I need to see that you're really here, that you're not just back because you think you're supposed to be. This is my life now, our daughter's life. I won't let you come in and ruin it again," she says, her voice steady, but the pain beneath it is undeniable. Ty nods slowly, his gaze unwavering. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, not yet. But I want to prove to you that I'm here for the right reasons, that I'm here to stay. I know I've got a lot to make up for, and I'll do whatever it takes to show you that I'm not the same person who left." Amy doesn't know what to say to that. She wants to believe him. She wants to let go of the anger and the hurt, but the truth is, it's not that simple. The scars of their past are too deep. There's a part of her that still wants to believe in the future they could have together, but she's also terrified of being hurt again. Just then, a distant sound echoes through the barn, a horse's frantic whinny. Both Amy and Ty turn instinctively toward the stable, the urgency of the sound snapping them out of their conversation. Without thinking, they both rush toward the barn, their long-buried instincts kicking in. In the chaos of the moment, their distance, their hurt, and their confusion all fade into the background as they work together to calm the animal. For a few minutes, the tension between them dissipates. Their hands work in sync, their motions fluid and familiar as they calm the horse. It's in this moment, when the work takes precedence over their emotions, that Amy realizes something. Maybe they can make it through this after all. Not because everything will be easy, but because there's still something between them, a connection, a bond they can't deny, even after all the years and all the pain. But just as the horse calms and the tension begins to ease, a shadow falls over the barn entrance. Jack stands there, watching them, his face set in that quiet, knowing way of his. He's seen this before, the way love can twist and turn, the way it can heal and hurt. "Amy, Ty," he says, his voice low and steady, "you two have a long road ahead. But remember, Heartland isn't just about the land. It's about the people. And if you're both willing to fight for what's worth keeping, then maybe you can find your way back to each other. But it won't happen overnight." His words linger in the air, a reminder that this is far from over. The journey of forgiveness and healing is a long one, and Ty's return is just the first step. As they stand there in the quiet of the barn, Amy and Ty both know that they can't undo the past, but they can choose how to move forward from here. And that choice will shape the rest of their lives. The episode closes with the camera lingering on their faces, unsure of what comes next, leaving the audience gripped by the uncertainty of the future. Will they find a way back to each other, or will the past be too great an obstacle to overcome? Only time will tell. The days that follow are a blur of hard work and unresolved tension. The Heartland Ranch, once a place of comfort and familiarity, now feels like a maze of unspoken words, stolen glances, and unresolved emotions. The ranch is as much a character in this story as the people who live on it, its land rich with history, yet now holding the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future. Every task, every chore they tackle together becomes a quiet test, not just of their strength, but of their willingness to let go of the years that have passed and face the person standing in front of them. Ty throws himself into work even harder now, almost as if to escape the discomfort of their strained interactions. It's clear he's trying to prove something to Amy, to himself, and perhaps even to the ranch. But every time he looks up from his tasks, his gaze instinctively finds her, and for just a moment, it's as if the world around them stops. There's an undeniable pull, a connection that hasn't disappeared, but the distance between them feels insurmountable. Amy, on the other hand, can't shake the feeling of walking on eggshells. She's learned to rely on herself, to stand tall and face life head-on. But with Tay's return, everything she thought she knew about herself is being questioned. She doesn't want to admit it, but part of her, perhaps the part that has always loved him, is still holding on to the hope that they could pick up where they left off. Yet, she can't ignore the fact that their lives have diverged. Tay's absence has left a void, and that space has been filled with new routines, new responsibilities, and a new version of herself that no longer relies on him to fill every gap. Their interactions have become small, brief moments scattered throughout the day, quick conversations about the horses, a shared glance when something needs fixing, or the occasional quiet moment when they work side by side in silence. But the weight of the past lingers in every action, every word. There's an invisible barrier between them, one they can't seem to break down, even though they both want to. It's not until a storm rolls in one evening, dark clouds gathering quickly over the horizon, that everything comes to a head. The wind picks up, the rain starts to fall in heavy sheets, and the pressure seems to rise, almost like the storm itself is a reflection of the tension that's built between them. The ranch seems to breathe under the weight of it all, as though even the land knows that something has to change. Amy and Ty are out in the field when the first gust of wind blows through. The horses stir nervously in their stalls. Instinctively, they both rush to take cover, but not before the winds start to tear through the fences, ripping through the land with a fury that matches the storm brewing between them. "Ty, we need to get the horses in," Amy shouts over the roar of the storm, the urgency of her voice cutting through the chaos. Tay doesn't hesitate. He moves quickly, grabbing the reins of the closest horse, his movements fluid and practiced. But as they work together, as they fight against the storm to get the horses safely into the stable, something changes. The intensity of the work, their bodies moving in sync, the shared focus on the task at hand, it shifts something inside both of them. It's as if the storm outside has mirrored the storm inside their hearts, and now, as they move together, there's an unspoken understanding that forms between them. The past is still there, undeniable and painful, but in this moment, they're no longer two people standing apart looking at each other from opposite sides of a chasm. In the middle of the storm, they're working together, just like they used to. Once the horses are secure, they take shelter in the barn, the rain pounding against the roof. They stand there, their faces lit by the flickering lantern, their breaths heavy from the work. The storm rages on outside, but inside, there's a stillness that feels almost sacred. Amy looks at Tay, really looks at him for the first time in days, and she can see the man he's become. He's still Ty, but he's different, worn by the years, scarred by his choices. And yet, there's a tenderness in his eyes, a willingness to fight for something they both thought was lost. "You never did explain why you left, Tay," Amy says, her voice quieter now, more vulnerable than before. Ty looks at her, his expression softening. "I didn't leave because I didn't love you, Amy. I left because I didn't love myself. I needed to find something inside me that was missing. And when I was finally ready, I came back." His voice falters slightly, the weight of his admission settling between them. Amy takes a breath, the anger she's carried for so long softening just a little. And now? Now that you've found yourself, what happens next? Tai steps closer to her, his gaze intense but gentle. I'm here to make things right. I'm here to stay.